Slavery has always been something present in our history, but the Atlantic slave trade was different. It shipped masses of Africans to America to work back-breaking hours and strenuous labor. They were mistreated during the water crossing and in the Americas. In the Book of Negroes, Anamanta's story may be fictional, but it paints an accurate picture of what happened to the African slaves, being stolen from their families in their own villages, then sold to Europeans, shoved into ships with barely no room to breathe, much less move, then being penned up in pens and sold in auctions like cattle. On the ships, the women were taken advantage of and raped by the sailors. People were whipped for not eating, taking too much food, or trying to escape, many dying on the trip over or becoming very ill. On the plantations, they weren't treated much better. The women were raped, their own children being sold from underneath them, being worked hard and cruelly punished if the work was not done satisfactorily. All these experiences are true and happened to the Africans many years ago. Lawrence Hill captures the true emotions of fear, bravery, and courage felt by those that crossed the seas and landed in the Americas. So what happened after Anamanta's story ended? What of slavery now? In the 13th documentary, directed by Ava DuVernay, she explores the path slavery has taken after the abolishment of slavery in 1865. The 13th Amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. This clause has been a double-edged sword ever since, a blessing to the man who kept himself free of crime, and a curse to the ones who ended up in jail. After the law was passed in 1865, thousands of slaves were newly freed. In result, the economy plunged from the loss of all the free labor. To help balance out the dip, masses of newly freed Africans were arrested for feeble offenses because of the clause, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. This meant the prisoners could be made into slaves again and provide free labor. Criminalization of African Americans is a huge topic covered in the documentary. Ava DuVernay does an excellent job in explaining the mythology and how it impacted the lives of the African American communities. The mythology of them being drunks, rapists, murderers, and criminals is thrown out to the public time and time again, so much to a point that even the African Americans were starting to believe it. Teenagers were being put in jails for crimes they did not commit, but because they were African Americans, they were the criminals. That's what people thought and believed. This thinking came down from generations teaching their kids that they were superior to African Americans. Even presidents and high-ranking officials were steadily turning the country to view the African American communities as criminals and nothing more. President Nixon even schemed and put into play the war on drugs. But even though it sounds like a great idea, it's not. Its true intentions were horrendous. To ban drugs meant that they would hurt those that used it. And at the time, it was mostly people of African culture and background. And this was their aim. They want to crush and weaken the African American communities. Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton have also joined in the bandwagon, giving police forces more authority and more forces on the street, resulting in police brutality and African Americans being targeted on the streets. So why should we care and why should you watch it? In the modern world, we are more accepting of all different people. African Americans, Indigenous, Asians, the list goes on and on. But have we completely erased the way of thinking African Americans as criminals? Or have we stopped being racist even in subtle ways? Not entirely, and we may be acting this way, but not realizing it. Watching The 13th by Ava DuVernay helps the individual and group realize their own actions and whether they need to change the way they act or talk. This documentary also grows your understanding of the effects of the Atlantic slave trade that still carry on in our societies today. This highly recommended film can be found on Netflix.